It was the cusp of 2021. It's not that long ago, so it shouldn't be difficult to recall how it seemed like every year preceding this year was worse than the one that came before that, in ways which at the time seemed unimaginable, but now, of course, just seem expected. But I don't know. I'm an optimist, and I really feel like this year is going to break the mold. You know, despite the pattern that's been set, I feel this year is promising. It's hopeful, reminiscent of a shaft of sunlight bursting through the dark clouds of a long and virulent hurricane, which begs the question, for me at least, why is it that just as my anxiety is lessening because it seems like the hurricane is ending, does separately my anxiety begin to increase at the notion that the hurricane is ending? Cheers to everybody. I'm still out here in Montauk, a town that's tiny, but not so tiny that it doesn't have its name on the can of beer. Cheers to you, people. Here we are, 12 months later. And I said the hurricane was ending. It's not ending, of course. We still have 70,000 people a day getting this virus. Still have more or less 1,000 people a day dying from it. New variants cropping up all over the place. 550,000 people who've died from this, whose families are still grieving. And every single one of those people who died, died in disbelief that this was happening to them. Most of them dying far from loved ones in a hospital, looking up at strange faces, wearing masks, and thinking that this is how it ends. Not with a bang, but with a whimper. Not fighting on a battlefield for love and God and country, defending your loved ones. No, just slowly drowning far from any body of water other than what is slowly rising in one's own lungs. But all this said, we're told that by May, every eligible American will have access to a vaccine. It's like finally, 12 months in, we're doing something right as a country. And surely every other country a few months later will have gotten the vaccine out to their population. So one way or another, it seems like this crisis is ending, and that we will all soon have come true the very thing that we've been wishing for every single day, and that is a return to normal. Though, of course, it begs the question, which normal are we hoping to return to? I mean, as I said before, every year has seemed worse than the year that's come before it. So how far back do we have to go before we're like, yes, this is the year. This is the year that I want to return to. For me specifically, does it mean that I'm now just going back out on the road for up to 6 months of the year performing at fringe theater festivals, which I love, which is such a privilege. It's amazing that it's even possible. It's the thing I've been bemoaning the entire time of being here. Oh, the lack of my livelihood, my ability to go out and express my art. But now suddenly the prospect that I soon will be able to go out and do it is causing a certain amount of consternation inside of me, as I'm suddenly remembering how tedious aspects of that is. is all the travel, all the money that has to be put up front, the arriving in strange towns, hoping people will like my show, which is the same as hoping people will like me. To put on a show every single day is akin to throwing a party and wondering if anyone will come. It's a way of sort of like assessing your worth every day, wondering if you have friends, wondering if you're popular. It's no good to be going through that. It's particularly me. I'm 52. It's like, come on, enough about that already, and it's these very things that we have been anxious about, that we've been hoping that would end, that I'm realizing I'm gonna miss, like I've been decrying the isolation, but now that the isolation is gonna end, I'm sort of like, the isolation. I've been upset. Like, we're so far from home. We're way out here on the tip of Long Island in Montauk, far from everybody, far from home. But I'm suddenly like, wow, this suddenly feels like home. Montauk's really nice. Not that I didn't know that, but all the walks I've been going on to the beach. And as much I might have felt like, oh my God, it's just me and my wife, Vanessa, and our 2 3/4-year-old baby girl, I'm also realizing I'm going to miss this special time we've had alone, where Vanessa and I have been attempting to do what parents have been trying to do since time immemorial, and that is give their child a perfect childhood, something which every other parent has failed at, but not me and Vanessa. Of course, we're going to succeed at this. We have to succeed at this. There's literally nothing else we've been doing 24/7 but attending to the emotional development of a little tiny, like, if we can't create the perfect human being, like, forget about it. No one else can. You know what I mean? Like, just close up. Stop going to therapy. It's we're all destined to fail at this. But we have not. We've created a perfect little bubble here in which to raise our child. And again, the very things that we've been sort of upset about and worried about for our child, we're now realizing, oh no, we don't want those things to end. Such as, she has no friends. She doesn't know anybody her own age. And Vanessa and I are like, wow, there's no one here to make her feel inadequate. There's no one to be mean to her. Can you imagine if no one your entire life had ever been mean to you? So far, that's little girl. She's also never been mean to anyone else. There is no one else to be mean to. She doesn't even know the meaning of mean. She's never seen TV. She's never seen a cartoon. She's never seen an advertisement. She's never been made to feel like she wants for something she doesn't have. She doesn't even know the concept of wanting things. She doesn't know about things. She just is having this perfect little childhood, just the two of us. We go outside every single day. We don't use our smartphones as a babysitter. We don't even use a babysitter as a babysitter. Me 6 hours and Vanessa 6 hours every single day. And we go out, even this entire winter here in New York, which the snow was perhaps more than ever, but we went out every single day, even on that cusp of 2021, the biggest snowfall of all, when you would look out the window and you'd be like, ooh, that looks difficult weather to go out in. Not us. I'd be like, all right, let's suit up. Let's go out. And Elia, our daughter, would look at me, and she doesn't yet know that she can make us think about it, that she can say no. She feels like it's a bad decision, but I'm telling her, no, the fresh air, it's good. If it looks freezing out there, that's just the assessment of someone who's in a terrible mood. It's refreshing. And so I slowly put on all of her outdoor winter clothes, which is a long process. There's snow pants, and there's warm socks, and there's regular pants, and there's a jacket, and there's sweaters, and there's a scarf, and there's a hat, and there's little tiny mittens which are impossible to put on because her hands are so tiny you don't even really know if the mittens are on, and they just sort of fall off because really her hands are just little nubs at the end of her coat. You have to tuck the mittens in, but after an hour, because that's how long it takes, because if it's a war of attrition with every article I'm putting on, she's trying to take it off. But I've been getting dressed for 5 decades longer than she has, and so an hour after beginning this process of getting dressed, she looks no different than if you were to take a magnifying glass and look at the period at the end of a sentence. And it's outdoors into the great white wide open. I mean, there's nowhere to go. I admit it, there's nowhere to go, but that doesn't stop us from going nonetheless. There's a school just a half a block away from us, and behind the school, there's a vast field that has 2 different baseball diamonds in it, and a soccer field, all of it sunk beneath what some who might call like a large snowdrifts, but I would say no. Yesterday, perhaps, yes, it snowed tremendously yesterday, but then it warmed up just a little bit, and what some might call rain right now, which I call misting, has combined to put the snow into its 4th state of matter. It's no longer solid, it's no longer liquid, it's not gas, it's become slush, a vast ocean of slush in front of us, and we begin marching across that field to the other side for no other reason than the same reason the chicken went to the other side, just because you have to go somewhere, and our faces are grim, but I can feel our bodies are alive. We're outdoors, we're living, we're one with nature. And if I had to complain about something, which I'm not, which I wouldn't, it would be that as good as I am at dressing my daughter for inclement weather, I'm frankly terrible at it for myself. I have some strange fear of overdressing. It's not that I don't like being warm, but I think I'm afraid that if I have one layer too much on, it will speak to my own virility, that it will seem to suggest that I chill easily, that I'm getting older, and older people seem to get cold quickly, so I'm always, in fact, underdressing and getting a little bit cold when I go out, which is not itself so bad. I would have to say the only real problem I'm experiencing now is the fact that I am trudging across this slushy field in a pair of running sneakers that I bought some months earlier when the weather was good, and I was sold by the promise that these sneakers made that they can breathe, which I guess at the time seemed like something desirable, as if, I was worried that I might find myself at like a Lamaze class and not have a partner, and then look down at the end of my legs and be like, oh, thank God, I've got these sneakers. And what looks to be like some sort of sci-fi material that the casual glance seems sturdy. Upon closer inspection, you would see that these sneakers are in fact pockmarked with thousands upon thousands of tiny little holes that now I'm realizing must have been hand placed there by the tiny hands of child laborers in some far away country. And then I'm realizing I should never have purchased these sneakers, not just because of the child laborers, but because the tiny little holes are now allowing into my feet thousands upon thousands of microscopic specks of slush, to the extent that I am very quickly realizing I'm losing feeling in my toes. And perhaps you're like me, like I don't know what toes are really for. Like balance, we're told, and you look at them and you're like, really, that's the best we could have come up with. Like, they completely go unnoticed. I don't think about them, except for, of course, when you twist the little guy 180 degrees back when you jam it on the end of a bedpost, and then a pain shoots through you that's way out of proportion to this little tiny nub there, that really, if this ever happened in a kitchen, I would reach for a cleaver and I'd chop it off, and I'd be like, great, be done with it. I don't need these toes, but it's amazing that just as soon as you can no longer feel them, in effect, That has been what I've been desiring of my toes. It's now all I can think about. That again, their presence has grown to an outsized degree within my brain. And so I stop halfway across this field. Really, we've only been out for a good 5 minutes. And Elliot sort of just looks up at me a little confused. And I say to her, well, time to head back. Which I get it. You know, we've spent an hour getting dressed and coming out here. I don't fault her for being confused. In fact, I think that she would like this, seeing what difficulty she gave me in getting dressed. And so I feel she must be playing some psychological game with me when she responds, no. And I say, well, Ellie, we have to go back because I can no longer feel my toes. And of course, she's cut from the same cloth I am. You know, I shouldn't expect her to have any more appreciation of toes than I do, that she probably doesn't understand why they're there, other than for keeping track of which piggy goes to which market to get which product. But then she does something that she's never done before, which I get it. She's 2 3/4 years old. Most things that human beings have done, she has not yet ever done before. And yet still she's choosing this moment to entirely wrap herself around one of my legs, as if she were a tiny toy koala hugging an eraser at the end of a pencil. And I suppose if this scene were viewed from above, from the satellite passing, we would cut a striking figure, the two of us, father and daughter, sort of leaning into what even I admit is a howling rain storm. Our faces grim, daughter hugging onto father, father with one hand on daughter's shoulder, as I'm telling her, you know, like, look, we either have to walk back or I'm gonna have to carry you. And every parent knows this moment where you realize that you are less a parent and more someone whose job it is to diffuse explosive devices, which we have no training in. And my daughter right now is a confusion of wires. Any one that I cut wrong will blow the entire thing sky high. And I realize that if we stay here, I lose my feet. And if we go, I lose peace. There's no winning this. And so eventually I tell her again, we either have to walk or I have to pick you up. Again, she's like, no. And so I sigh deeply, bend down, and lift her up. And instantly, of course, she explodes, begins writhing in my arms, screaming, let me go, let me down, crying out. And whatever notion I might have had that she's been having a perfect childhood, well, now she's crying in such a way that suggests all memories of a perfect childhood are in real time being erased. And though I'm sure she won't have an actual crystal clear memory of this moment when she gets older, I'm afraid that the entirety of our time here in lockdown might be remembered in the afterglow of this moment, of her yearning for freedom from her father's grasp, as she screams and writhes in my arms, as I, with my face grim, continue trudging across a couple baseball diamonds that are sunk beneath a lumpy ocean, as I'm thinking to myself, well, it wasn't like this, was it, 1 year ago? Wasn't like this for any of us on the cusp of 2020. It feels like a millennia ago, so it's perhaps difficult to recall how it seemed at the time, like every year that had come before that had seemed worse than the year that had come before that, in ways which had seemed at the time unimaginable, but which now, of course, reveal a serious lack of imagination when it comes to imagining how bad things can get. And were we naive at the time to have never considered that perhaps we were merely in the eye of the storm? Even though, Hope springs eternal to me, and I felt like this year, 2020, was going to really break the mold. I felt like this year it's going to be. It seemed promising to me. It seemed like a shaft of sunlight breaking through the dark clouds after a long and virulent hurricane. And it felt like all we have to deal with really is just some bushfires in Australia and an election, and we're all adults. We'll all calmly come to a decision about who we want to lead our country, and perhaps we all feel like people will come to their senses and see things the way we see things, which is to say, the right way to see things. And I felt every confidence that things would work out. But, well, what can we say now? Hindsight is 2020. And so there on the cusp of that year, my friend Jordan, he leans over to me and he says, "So, what are you thinking?" And I respond to him in typical fashion, typical for me, given the question, given the situation. Not that Jordan knows it's typical, because he hasn't been, or at least he shouldn't be, or at least I hope he hasn't been keeping an Excel spreadsheet of every response I've given to every similar question in every similar type situation as this, so he doesn't have a data set through which he would be able to determine whether my response is or is not typical. As I lean back to him and I say, "I don't know. What are you thinking?" And the thing that I am definitely not thinking about, the thing about which I am hoping he will do all the thinking for us, is what beer we should order right now. If there were a large room, like a convention center, like the kind of room they have like luncheons in and give out awards, the kind that's got like accordion dividers that they keep opening up to make the room ever larger. And let's say that room was filled to the brim with psychoanalysts in brand new white lab coats, each with goggles that could tint in the sunlight, their own personal Bunsen burners, each with their own tiny little tank of propane. Not that they need any of this because they're therapists, but they have so much funding for this study, as if the $1.9 billion stimulus package recently approved were accidentally earmarked solely for the study of me. They would point to this moment of my inability to confidently and knowledgeably order my own craft beer as exhibit A number 1 about my inherent lack of masculinity. And when I say masculine, understand I'm using it in the most cliched way, in the way that society has defined it for eons and eons. And I know if the two-way devices that are computers and phones allowed for some dialogue right now, you would make the point to me, are we still beholden to these outdated notions of masculine and feminine? And don't we understand that really they're both undulating within every single trait? I would say to you, yes, and yet I have been in so many bars with so many guys ordering so many beers, and the ability to know something about craft beer and order it confidently is worn as a badge of masculinity. And as you may notice upon me, no badges, not just for the beer, no badge of masculinity for anything, right? Look at me, nothing. You ever heard me talk about cars? No, you haven't, because I don't know anything about cars. I know nothing, no badge of masculinity for that. Sports, no one's giving me a badge of masculinity for sports, because I'm not good at the sports. There's nothing. You know what I've never gotten a badge of masculinity for? Theater. You want to know why? Because they don't give badges of masculinity for theater. My favorite band in high school was Duran Duran. And by high school, I mean college and every year since then. They are the only band for whom I will still purchase the hard CD, even though I have not owned a CD player for over a decade. But I want to make sure they've still got some loose change in their pockets. It's more important to me than me having loose change in my pockets. And yet, for my steadfast commitment and loyalty to Duran Duran, has anyone awarded me a badge of masculinity? Not a bit. You want to know a sentence that has never been said in the history of time? Hey, I'm putting together a hunting party. Let's invite Dockery. If anything, they would be more inclined to say derisively, oh, Dockery, he couldn't even hurt a fly. Which if my wife were to overhear this, she would say, oh, you don't know the half of it, and then would regale them with tales of me prancing around our apartment, spending way too much time that I should be spending on to-do lists that are forever getting further and further away from to done, with one open Tupperware container in one hand and a piece of hard cardstock in the other, as I am attempting to capture errant flies in mid-flight, delicately so that I might ferry them unharmed to an open window where I will gently release them back out into the wild and watch as they fly back up towards the sun, my own heart soaring with them as I think, fly, fly. No creature on God's green earth has been more appropriately named than you. And this room of psychotherapists, they will conclude that in me they have found the least masculine heterosexual man on the planet. To which, might I just interject, they've only studied me, okay? Because there wasn't funding to study anybody else. And just as they're putting away their Bunsen burners, just as they're tucking their little test tubes back into their little velvet pouches and getting excited to go home because their study is done, there'll be that one guy in the back of the room, way back there, way back here, you know? And they'll be like, hey, and they'll be like, oh no, that guy, what? And he'll be like, what about the movies? And they'll be like, oh no, he doesn't really like going to the movies. We've established that. And he'd be like, that's not entirely true. And they'll all know what he's talking about, you know? It's the fact that, like, yeah, I don't like going to movies that much. I think movies generally are pretty bad. The only thing that will get me to go out to a movie theater is if I know that the movie is going to have an explosion. I love like fireballs. You know, and you want to know what the worst kind of movies are? They're the ones that have explosions. And then I see them and I leave the movie theater. I'm like, I hate movies. I'm never going to another one again until someone will mention a movie. And they're like, you're going to go see it? And I'm like, does it have explosions? And they're like, yeah. And I'm like, oh, I hate myself, you know? I don't know what this is. It's something inside me that needs violence, you know? The only kind of good movie that has violence in it? War movies. I like going to war movies, which, like, I know, it's disappointing. I know, should be better. I don't know what it is. I don't understand it, man. Because, you know, like, I think war is stupid. I think saying war is stupid because, like, who's arguing with me right now? Nobody's arguing with me. Like, I get it, self-defense, sure, right on. But, like, the idea that, like, I would be in some kind of, like, situation where I'd let somebody else, like, tell me to go to some other country and, like, kill somebody for their own geopolitical purposes, and I'm going to shoulder the PTSD, and I'm going to do that to no way, not going to happen. But put me in a comfortable seat, very far from an actual war, and ooh, I'm in, man. I don't understand it myself. There's something inside me that gets titillated something that gets excited and something that gets tickled, and I imagine it's the same thing that has tickled the hearts of men and excited them to go off to war ever since men first started getting tickled. And I know you're like, oh, so many of you, not all of you, some of you, were thinking like, oh, it's so unattractive. We thought otherwise of you. This is nothing cute about any of this. And which yeah, I get it. But on the one, there is one thing cute about it. If I may, I'll go about war movies, and that is when two middle-aged men make plans to go on a friend date to see one, when they have to arrange with their wives and say, please, can I go to a war movie with my friend? And they have to make sure the wife is okay with taking care of the little child, and the wife says, yes, you may go to a war movie with your other middle-aged friend. And that's exactly what's going on with me and Jordan as we've trundled off together to see a movie in Park Slope, Brooklyn, which I dare say is the greatest movie theater on the planet. I don't know if that's true. The Nighthawk there, I haven't done a survey. Maybe there are better movie theaters. I don't know, but it's definitely the kind of cinematic experience that is offered in this movie theater, that the cinematic experience has slowly been creeping towards ever since that first caveman lit a fire in his domicile and danced his fingers in front of it and displayed shadows on the wall of a dog chasing a rabbit for the entertainment of his cave friends, as his cave wife welcomed them in and said, "Mi casa es su casa," and the cave neighbors said, "Oh, we love how comfortable this stone furniture is. Where did you get it?" And the cave wife saying, "We're so fortunate, it just fell off the walls." And slowly, the cinematic experience has been inching ever forward more and more, trying to ape the experience of seeing a movie in your living room. Just as living rooms similarly have been slowly creeping forward and trying to make it seem more and more like you are living in a cinema. And both these slow roads have converged here at the Nighthawk in Park Slope, Brooklyn, where not only are Jordan and I sitting in plush faux leather seats that can recline, not only do we each have our own cup holder, but we've got a pair of tables in between us, and there's a team of young, attractive men and women clad in black running around unobtrusively, making sure that we are all well fed. There's menus that I don't know why I've made it through so many decades thinking that food in a cinema had to just be, Raisinets. There's like gourmet burgers here. There's popcorn drizzled with truffle oil. I don't even know what truffle oil tastes like. I've never even thought about truffle oil, but sitting there knowing it's on the menu makes me feel like, indeed, there is a heaven on earth. Not that Jordan and I are here for the food, because we're two middle-aged men. We're here for the craft beer, and we are holding menus that are filled with selections in our hands, both of us perusing them, or rather Jordan is. I'm just pretending, because the nouns and adjectives that are used to describe each one of these craft beers, they do nothing to evoke a sense of flavor in my mouth. They seem randomly picked out of hats to describe these beers. It's not just here, it's always when I'm going out to see to drink craft beers. I don't really care what I'm going to order, because it's all sort of the same to me, because the truth is, I don't care about beer. I like beer. Oh, I like it. Yeah, it's great. It's great. But I'm not here for the beer. I'm never here for the beer. I'm here for the experience of having a beer. The beer is just a means to the ends of spending time with a friend outside of my own home. And the only requirement I have of a beer is that it not be one that I can find in my own refrigerator, which I tell you, 100% of the time when I'm looking at a menu of craft beers is the case. So why not just order what Jordan is ordering? He makes a suggestion. I say, yeah, that sounds good, and then because at least it'll help me get to know my friend a little bit better, not literally, but sensorially, to know what flavors he likes having rolling around inside his head as we both sit back and watch men shoot at each other. And I know you're wondering, what movie are you actually watching? Not that you would necessarily ask it, because certainly as I know, as we all should know, that question is the last resort of any conversation. It's what you pull out when you find yourself at a party that you're not sure you wanted to go to, and then as soon as you show up at the party, you're 100% sure you didn't want to come, but here you are. It's bad form to turn around and you're next to the hors d'oeuvre table and you reach forward and you get some crackers and some cheese at the exact same moment that one person you really don't want to talk to is doing the same, but now you have to speak, and they're so incredibly boring, which you realize slowly is not their fault. You suddenly realize, you're the one who's boring, and the conversation is just it's dying on the vine, like as if a frost has come in and killed everything, and there's nothing left to say, and you don't know any way out. And so finally you just hear yourself saying to them, so what's the last movie you saw? And you hate yourself for saying it, but of course that was then. To ask that question now, the question is tinged with sentimentality now, because it harkens back to the before times, before our worlds were turned upside down. It puts you into a place where thinking the only thing you had to worry about was how you were going to get home from the cinema. It's inherent in the question is the possibility that none of us may ever see a movie in a movie theater again. Like we all think we will, but never before have I considered the possibility that maybe I won't, So to ask the question now, it's an electric question. It gives us some insight to ask, what was the last movie you saw? Well, that's the movie that Jordan and I are watching right now. A movie not about the year 2021, not about the year 2020, but instead about the year 1917, which is the name of the movie we are watching. The most immersive war movie I've ever seen in my life, because through some amazing balletic choreography between the camera person and the director and the actors and all the extras and the set design, they have made it seem as if this film has been shot in a single take, as if we are watching it unfold in real time as we watch two British soldiers. The movie begins with them asleep, lying in a field. There's tall grass, there's some wildflowers. The sun is just so, it's beautiful and it's peaceful, and they're sort of like gently kicked, if that's possible, awake and told that their commanding officer wants to see them. And then they get up and the camera follows them, as it does for the entire movie, follows them as they enter the trenches, follows them as they get deeper and deeper into the trenches, as the trenches themselves get more and more fortified, as the warriors they are passing get more and more shell-shocked, more and more injured, and we are them, and we are amazed, as surely they are too, to see how quickly their worlds can be turned upside down. There's a real sense of claustrophobia because the camera only shows what they can see. It never peers above the trenches, so you don't know what's out there. The enemy is somewhere. The enemy could strike at any time. Death is all around them as they are then sent on a suicide mission which is when the camera then does go above the trench, and they are forced to go across the front lines, which apparently the Germans have abandoned, but they don't know for sure. And so, as the movie progresses, the tension is building, death is all around them, the enemy is here, but they can't see it until all of a sudden they do, and death reveals itself. And as a film, it really set the stage for this entire past year. Really recreated the mood of what was going on. And Jordan, he's written our beers down on a little chit of paper, put in a little slot. A little handsome young man has come and gotten the paper and then gone off and gotten our beers, and now very unobtrusively has returned with a tray with our 2 pints upon it. And he's placing 1 pint down upon Jordan's table, and then as he's about to place my pint down upon my end of the table, as the action behind him is really starting to cook, as the carnage is starting to bubble up, as people are finally beginning to get shot, the tray that is supporting the beer of mine suddenly becomes something that is not a tray. Imagine whatever you want, but don't imagine it's a tray any longer, which is to say that all of a sudden the beer is in free fall, falling from what used to be a tray into the dark abyss below my waist, where it then crashes upon the floor and breaks into a million beer pieces. I don't imagine that it was glass, because nothing shattered, but the waiter is down so quickly, picking it up and of course apologizing profusely, and I am accepting his apologies just as profusely as I'm sure you would do yourselves. And yet, as good as you think you might be at making him feel all right for having done something wrong, I assure you I'm better. I'm just very good at making people feel good when they've done something bad, because I'm aware this, of course, this was an accident, right? And this is not this man's ambition to be satisfying and curating our epicureal needs is behind him. The people are screaming and surround sound, and blood is splattering all over the place. And so I am very profuse in letting him know it's okay, and he is apologizing, and I ride it right to the edge. For me to have accepted his apologies any further would have perhaps pushed it into sarcasm, but I know better than to do that. I have a bag at my feet. I don't lift up the bag. I don't want him to know that it's currently absorbing a pint's worth of beer. And he goes off. He gonna get some towels, is back quite quickly, again apologizing. Again, I'm letting him know it's no big deal. In fact, I think I make him feel so good about it that by the time this is through, I dare say that he might be happy that this happened, because we have broken through the barrier that normally exists between waiter and patron, and we are now having a real human moment, looking at each other in the eyes. Or I would be looking at him in the eyes if his face weren't completely black, silhouetted against the carnage behind him. And he leaves, he takes off, and I am left feeling good about myself, feeling good, therefore, about the world, because I've made this man feel okay about something that so easily he could have just, who knows how many beers he's dropped before, but certainly this was his favorite beer dropping experience. The only thing that is tempering my experience about how good I feel about myself is the fact that I can't stop thinking about how good I feel about myself. Is an awareness that a genuinely altruistic person would not keep complimenting him or herself about how altruistic and good-natured they are. And I wish I could stop focusing on it, particularly as this is the most immersive movie I've ever seen, and yet still I can't stop thinking and mulling over and recounting about like how that had all just gone down, and how good I feel about myself. And but as time is going on, I'm also starting to wonder, has he forgotten to get my replacement beer, which I am afraid if that's the case, I don't know what to do, because to tell him that he's forgotten would be to undo all the work I've just done, would be to make him feel terrible about the thing I just made him feel good about, the thing he'd done wrong. And so I'm telling myself, let it go, let it go, let it go. It's okay, you know. But the problem is, the thing is, I don't know if I've mentioned this, and that's what people say when they know they haven't mentioned something, you know, when they are unsure how a new piece of information is going to sit with the receiver of that information. So they present it as if it's nothing, when in fact, this is part and parcel of this whole situation, is the fact that Jordan and I, we got a little bit high before the movie. We met outside and we smoked a little marijuana, because I want the world to know. I wanted myself to know that this is not the Martin, the Sutton family man. No, this is Party Marty who's come to this movie house. And what's more, Jordan and I, we've agreed to meet up, to take this rare opportunity to sort of to have a conversation, right? To meet, to perhaps talk about how our lives are going, you know, at this juncture. And yet we've decided to do this in a black box where no one is allowed to talk. And perhaps that would be an awkward realization that like we are not prepared to actually speak to each other. But all you do is you smoke a little bit of marijuana, and suddenly it's like, oh no, we're on the same page. We're copacetic. We're of like mind. And what's more, we've smoked a little pot for the same reason everybody smokes some pot whenever they're consuming some entertainment, is because we are hoping to increase the you are there-ness of the moment. The very thing that people make fun of stoners for, the fact that they are often suddenly saying mid-sentence, wait, what was I just talking about? Is in fact the very quality that everyone's looking for when they do get high. Because smoking marijuana, it messes with the timeline that we are all so terribly married to. We wake up in the morning, we had a brief respite from dreams, which perhaps tortured us in their own way, but upon waking, it all comes flooding back. Exactly what you need to do, exactly who you're angry with, exactly who's angry at you, who you're hoping to impress, who you're hoping to attract, all the things you're going to fail at, all the things you're hoping to succeed at. We cannot escape this narration, this storyline that is fully of our own creations in our head. But you smoke a little bit of marijuana, and for a moment it just severs it, and you suddenly forget what had just happened, which is to say you're fully in the present moment. And when that present moment is the most immersive war movie you've ever seen in your life, it is quite a moment. And yet, not only can I not stop thinking about how satisfied I am with myself, I can't stop thinking about how thirsty I am, because as anyone who smokes some pot knows, it's an unfortunate side effect that your mouth becomes as dry as a baby's diaper, before the baby has used it. And I'm trying to tell myself, like, just let it go. Just let it go. Perhaps I should use my physical discomfort to get me more in tune with the hardships that these characters are going through in the movie, which is not to suggest that the experience of fighting in the trenches of World War I is akin to being thirsty in a movie theater. But I mean, really, unless you're currently thirsty, you don't understand what thirsty is. How about this? How about this for a little project, okay? Whatever drink you have in front of yourself, don't drink it. Don't drink it until I drink my drink, okay? Until I release you from this moment. And I guarantee you, as soon as I'm telling you you're not allowed to drink, what's the first thing you're thinking? You're like, oh, I actually am a little bit thirsty. Oh, maybe I can quickly sneak a drink, and then I'll join in on this. No, but don't do that. Don't do that. You know what I mean? Don't do that. Like, just really commit yourself to not taking a sip. And what's more, I want to try and create the impression that, like, I'm going to forget to release you from this moment, just so you can better understand what I'm thinking. It's a dangerous ploy when you're doing a show, because you don't really want your audience to be physically uncomfortable, and yet I am attempting to increase the you are there-ness of this moment without you actually having to get high. Though if indeed you are high, wow, you are gonna have quite the moment. And I know as I'm telling myself, I should really let it go. This is a trivial thing to be concerned about, considering what's going on in front of me on the movie screen. But the thirstier I get, the more I'm thinking, like, what's going on in front of me in the movie theater? Nothing's going on in front of me in the movie theater. There's nobody actually experiencing anything in front of me. It's just light reflecting off a very reflective screen back into my retina, and my brain is turning those images and those sounds into some kind of story in my mind. And even the actors who served as the models upon which that light would hit and get recorded on that celluloid to then play itself into my brain, they're not experiencing any actual discomfort. They've got craft services just off camera. They're not thirsty. In fact, I dare say none of them even know what they're talking about. They probably have never been in any war whatsoever. Certainly, they've never been in World War I, which is a very safe thing to assert, because nobody on this entire planet of ours has been in World War I, because no one alive today can even have any first-person memory of World War I. So what's going on in front of me? It's all secondhand. In fact, if there's anyone in this movie theater who has a real connection to World War I mean, perhaps it's me. Because at least me, my great grandfather fought in World War I, fought in the trenches, just as they are portraying in front of me, fought in Europe, far from his home in Britain, just as they are portraying here. My great-grandfather was shot in the trenches, and he died in the trenches. The only words I know that my great-grandfather spoke of his own volition were his final words, which were recorded by someone he was with and then put in a letter and sent off to his family, which I guess is my family. They're very British last words. It's very hard to believe that this is the way someone would express the feeling of your life force quickly running out of you. But he said, "I'm done for." And then I can only imagine he lay there thinking, wow, this is how it ends. Far from home, far from his loved ones, looking up at strangers or people he barely knows. And I don't know if they were gas masks. Perhaps they were wearing masks, but even if they weren't, they would think to themselves that even when your life ends with a bang, even when there's some valiant story to it, you certainly are lying there incredulous. As do we all. Human beings, we have an amazing propensity, don't we, to think like death is never going to come for any one of us. Even when we're surrounded by it, even if you go off to war, you think, oh, it's never going to happen to me. Even if you read about it every single day in the paper, even if 500,000 people have died of it, you still think like, it's happening to other people. It's not going to happen to me. And my great-grandfather surely lived and loved and laughed just the same as any one of us. And now he is gone from this planet, gone even from the living memory of anyone on this planet. No one alive has ever seen my great-grandfather. No one has seen what it looked like when he speaks. No one has seen what it looks like when he walks, how he holds his body. No one has seen what it looked like when he ran across a battlefield. Or rather, I've seen it. I myself have seen it, if I'm being honest. I'm not crazy. My brother saw him as well, as did my mother. We were sitting in a small room. I was temping at the time, and that's what you say, when you're working. But no one wants you to say you were working somewhere. They want you to say you were temping there, because it's not meant to describe what you do. It's just meant to describe your character. You say, "Oh, I was a temp." People are like, "Thank you. I got you now," And I was temping at the Museum of Modern Art, and they have a archival collection of movies, and it turns out that my great-grandfather was an actor, and he acted in a film in 1913 called Ivanhoe, and he played King Arthur. And we reserved a screening room at the Museum of Modern Art where we then watched the only print that exists of this film. And there he was, running across the screen in front of us, play acting a battle, not, of course, realizing that he was recreating determinedly ahead of time the situation that would be how he would pass on from this world on a battlefield. And of course, the film looks very, very old. What's funny, of course, is to think that even as they were making the film, since it was of the Middle Ages, they were making something that was meant to look very, very old. This one surviving print, it has interstitial titles. It's a silent movie. For some reason, they're all in Dutch. That's the print that survived, and I can't read any of it, though I imagine surely one of them say, "I'm done for." And it's strange to think the little clues of us that are left behind, these last words on a battlefield, this image of him in this movie running around, fighting other soldiers from the Middle Ages. He never possibly being able to imagine this moment of his great-grandchildren watching him. Impossible to conceive because, of course, we had yet to be conceived. His words are gone, but there are other words he's written, because he was not just an actor, he was a playwright as well. And his plays now exist on the shelves in my mother's apartment in Brooklyn. Plays that he put on with his wife, my great-grandmother, and they traveled over 100 years ago from Britain to North America, where they traveled around putting on their little plays. And it's impossible for me to imagine what that looked like, as I'm sure it will be impossible for my great-grandchildren to imagine what it must have looked like for their great-grandfather and great-grandmother, my wife. Impossible to imagine what it must have looked like when we were running around North America putting on our little plays. My great-grandfather had 2 children, a boy and a girl. The boy, he signed up to go to World War II, where he was killed on the battlefield. His daughter, my grandmother, she went to the Royal Academy of Dramatic Arts in London and got a degree in theater. She became a costume designer. She wrote books on theater for schoolrooms and classes. Later in life, she wrote an autobiography that she self-published so that her own true story would be out there in the world. She had 3 children, one of whom is my mother, who went to SUNY Purchase College, where she studied acting. We all like to believe that we are creating our own stories, that we aren't just replaying the same stories of those who've come before us. I don't believe in recreation, and I don't believe that we come back as our ancestors, but I do believe in science. I do believe there are strands of DNA that lived in my great-grandfather that perhaps compelled his children, their children, and now me to pursue theater when theater doesn't even exist right now, that perhaps compels me to go and sit in movie theaters and consume scenes of violence, not just from my mother's side, but my father. My father went to the Vietnam War, signed up for it twice, wasn't drafted, went once and was like, "I'm going back." You know? If there's one thing that this pandemic has taught us, is that death is everywhere around us. And we already know this, but it's become clear, that even in the midst of denial that'll ever come for us, we must recognize that we are part of a lineage, and those who've come before us have passed on, but have left with us some piece of themselves that we will then pass on to those who come after us. And who better to teach your children what it's like to be you than you? Which is why I am spent so much time trying to give my daughter the proper tools to ensure that she will grow into a woman who can handle the passions that I have been passed down to and will then pass on to her. It is why I am attempting to give her the perfect childhood. It is why, even as she is screaming and writhing in my arms, I suddenly cry out, "There's a playground, let's go!" And though the playground is not a tropical oasis in the midst of this field of slush, it is just as sodden and wet and miserable as everything else around us. I have, in desperation, made a suggestion that perhaps we should go and play on it. In fact, the playground might in fact even be worse than the field we've just been walking across, because it is set upon its own mini field of wood chips. And we are now standing on the edge of it looking at these puddles in which are floating bits of organic matter that have slowly been decaying since last autumn, picking our way across islands of wood chips as I am trying to think desperately of something we might do in this frozen, wet playground that might make us forget about this horrible moment we've just come from. I say to her, let's go to the swings. But as soon as we get to the edge of the swings, there are just these large puddles underneath it. It is impossible to even get to them. I say, hey, what about the jungle gym, But as soon as we get there, I realize the bars are so cold that if she were to touch them and we later decided to go, she would have to leave her hands behind. And it seems like the total write-off, this decision to come here to the playground. I'm looking around when my daughter says something she's never said before, which again, at the age of 2 3/4 years, is not so unusual that there are things she's never said before. There are most things she has never said before, and yet she is making the decision about when to say things for the very first time. And for the very first time, she says to me, "You want to go on the slide?" My daughter is a very cautious girl. I've never really had to worry that she's going to hurl herself off the side of a bed. She needs help. She's quick to reach for my hand. And of course, I'm quick to give her my hand and help her along the way. And so it's strange now. This moment, she is wanting to, for the first time in her life, go down a slide in this environment. And she's not pointing at the kiddie slide, she's pointing at the adult slide, which is not to imply that this is a slide purely for adults. It's just to say it's the largest slide in the playground, standing tall at a full 6.5 feet. Of course, it's not as simple as climbing up the slide to then quickly go down it. We have to go to the end of a plastic molded habit trail that we then have to negotiate, going across what would be a rope bridge if it were actually made out of ropes, and then sort of negotiating our way to the top of this slide, where I then sit down on this very jacket, which I'm able to pull underneath my bum, because of course the slide is totally wet. But I'm thinking no, this will keep my butt dry. This, in fact, might even make us go down just a little bit faster. And I'm excited to go down the slide because she's never gone down a slide. I haven't been going down slides because that would be weird. And so we're sitting there, her in my lap at the top of this 6.5 foot tall slide, looking out at a vista across the frozen ball fields we've just traversed, a scene that can only be described by the word bleak. And I am coming to accept that, yes, the rain is horizontal, it's absolutely miserable. But I say to my daughter, are you ready? And I can't see her face, but I'd like to believe she is smiling when she says to me, okay. And with that, we release and begin to go down the slide. Now, I said before that I don't know anything about cars, and it's true, and yet I'm going to attempt to talk about one thing right now. I saw the movie Mad Max, okay, lots of explosions, oh my God. And there in his car, there's like a red button. And when he wants to go really fast, he presses the red button. It's some kind of like afterburner thing. It just makes him go really fast like that. I don't know if that's like a common thing in cars today, but it's certainly in Mad Max. Well, that's really the only thing I can use to describe what happens to Elia and I as we go down this slide. It's as if we pressed the red button, suddenly our speed so fast, increasing exponentially as we're racing down this slide towards something that I had not really considered before, because looking out across this bleak landscape, I had not realized that in fact there are levels of bleakness within this playground in front of us. And at the end of this slide is just a very long, dark swamp. Just black. I have no idea how deep it is. How many fathoms it goes down is unfathomable. And bits of ice and sticks and what I can only imagine are dead animals floating somewhere in there. As I'm like, oh no, like I'm just gonna have to plunge my feet straight into the depths of this murky abyss. But even though we're going so fast, I'm able to quickly see and calculate that on either end of the slide at the bottom, there are small islands of wood chips. And I realize that perhaps I might be able to just perfectly stick the landing with my feet and save us both. And so as we're going down the slide, I'm slowly spreading my legs out, going down balls first, which any guy will tell you that is unwise and really speaks to how desperate this situation is. Neither of us making a sound as we go down, approaching these little islands at which I stick my feet into perfectly. And for a brief moment, I think to myself, God, I should have joined the Olympics. But what I had not really factored in was the fact that there's a thing called momentum, which means that even though my feet had come to a stop, the rest of me did not. And my feet had become something like the pole of a pole vaulter. And what had started as a sort of balls first, feet first slide down this hill has now become inverted, so that my feet are behind me, and I am now flying above this pond in a way that I hope evokes Superman. One arm out in front of me, the other holding tucked into me the most precious thing I have on this planet, a fragile 2 3/4-year-old girl, a little creature for whom I am hoping to give a perfect childhood, who I'm hoping to save from anything bad ever happening to her. The two of us just sailing across the surface of this water, a surface which of course I am soon going to meet with my nose, which acts as sort of a prow to a ship, creating a fantastic wake as I plunge into the water, a wake as vast as if I were pulling behind me, if I were a speedboat and there were a pyramid of 10 water skiers being pulled and behind me, and it's of course not long that we just plunge straight into it and come to a sudden stop. And if there were a high-speed photographer capturing this entire thing, I would hope that there would be one image taken just after the moment I've come to a stop, and yet just before I do anything about it, an image that would have me just fully submerged, my entire front, just the top of this hat sticking out of the water, one arm fully in, perhaps looking something like a corpse, were it not for the fact that my left arm is curled out of the water, holding my daughter above me. She wearing an expression that I cannot see, but I have to assume is one of, oh my God, this is what going down a slide is like. I'm never doing this again in my life. And then like that, I spring up. My hand has been run roughshod over the bottom of this small lake, but it's not bleeding. It's all right. And I turn and look at my daughter, who is also not injured, but there's just frozen water on bits of snow and wood chips on her face. And she is, of course, wailing. She's screaming in just abject terror and shock And me, I'm just immediately on my feet and immediately just walking, continuing in the same direction that we'd been walking, not just 5 minutes earlier across these frozen ball fields, just feeling like, I'm glad nobody's around. I'm glad no one's around, And if there had been someone around, it would have not only been embarrassing, they would have been confused to see me approaching them, to see my entire front, to see bits of sticks and leaves in my beard, to see the entirety of me soaked, and then be surprised when I pass them to see that my backside's completely dry. And yet, as thankful as I am no one's here, there's a part of me that's like, yeah, I wish there was someone here. I wish there were another dad who looked just like me with a wailing child in their arms so that I could look at them and be like, oh man, being a dad, not easy, huh? You win some, you lose some. But no, of course, there's none out here because they all know better than me that this is not a day to go to the playground. And as miserable as I am and as miserable as I feel, I must say that there is a strand of DNA inside of me that allows me to dig deep and put on a pure performance for my daughter, that allows me to throw on a fake smile as I turn to her, wailing, crying in my arms, and say to her, we wiped out. I mean, we didn't just wipe out, we wiped out. Oh my God, we went up the slide, we went across the rope bridge that would be a rope bridge. If there were ropes, we sat on the top of the slide, we went down, and then what happened? And my daughter, who's kind of stopped crying, she says to me, we wiped out? And I'm like, we didn't just wipe out, we wiped out. And then we're home, because just 5 minutes from home, right? This whole thing is happening. And inside, I'm like, it's time for you to take a warm bath right now. And all those clothes we'd spent an hour putting on, I'm tearing them all off, and I'm running the bath, and Vanessa's coming down from upstairs. And she's like, what happened? And I look at Elliot, I'm like, you want to tell her? And she's like, Mama, we were almost like birds. We were almost flying. And I appreciate my daughter for throwing in that word almost, because it's true. Because as I say to Vanessa and Elia, and then we wiped out. And I'm sure my daughter will have no crystal clear memory of this moment, but I hope that she takes away the feeling and perhaps applies it to this entire year of lockdown, this feeling of flying securely in her father's arms, the two of us almost like birds soaring across this frozen, bleak landscape underneath us until we totally wipe out in a way that can only be described as awesome. And it's in this way that our successes are the same as our failures, two sides of the same coin. It's in this way that the very moments of abject defeat, of pure anxiety, can, looked at a different way, become things that we are excited about, stories we will tell, things we are hopeful for, all moments at once, just mirroring each other. This story that we are all telling ourselves, just a figment of our minds and a factor of how we tell it to ourselves. The only immutable fact, apparently, is that one day we will all pass on. And as terrifying as this is, at the same time, it's exciting to know that there is a part of us that gets passed on to those who come afterwards. Even if not literally, even if you don't have children, you can pass on your influence. You can pass on what it is to be a human being to them, to help them cope and understand the world as it is. Everything about this year has been both confusing and clear, has evoked anxiety while at the same time has been exciting. And it will continue to be so. And we will continue to be wrapped up in our own stories. even when we know that these are just projections of our own mind, wrapped up so much to the extent that eventually we will just have to blurt out to our friend next to us in a movie theater, "Jordan, I think he's forgotten to get my drink." And Jordan's like, "Well, if you ordered a drink, you should just tell him and he'll get you a new one." I'm like, "Yeah, I know." And I'm like, "Wait a minute, what do you mean if I ordered him a drink? Didn't you order a drink?" And he's like, "No. Did you ask me to order you a drink?" And I'm like, "No, I didn't ask you to, but didn't you see I didn't write down a drink?" And you just got it, which is like too much explanation to like go into when Jordan is enjoying the most immersive war movie he's ever sat through in his life. And so instead, I think to myself, even as the bullets are flying in front of me, what a bullet I just dodged, accusing this waiter of forgetting about my beer just after having had such a lovely moment with him, and him being like, "I don't know what you're talking about." And so I raise my hand, I flag him, and I bring him over. And I say, in a way that is supposed to suggest no one has ever had this idea before, I say to him, "You know what? I think I'm going to get a beer." And he's like, "Okay, what kind of beer do you want?" And I'm like, I don't know. He's like, "Well, you got to write down a little piece of paper, put it in front, and I'll take it." I'm like, "You know what? Can you just decide the beer? Can you just decide the beer? Because the truth is, I don't really care about beer. I'm not here for the beer. I'm here for the experience of having the beer. The beer is just a means to an end of sharing some time with friends outside my home," which is what we've been doing for the past hour. And so please, cheers to all of you for being here with me in Montauk and wherever you all are. Thank you for being a part of this show. Thank you to those of you who've watched other shows. Thank you for those of you who've been on board this crazy train since I started doing these shows in August. I really can't thank you enough. It's been remarkable to feel a sense of energy and connection despite the fact that no one is here. That as soon as I close the laptop down, I'm just going to be sitting by myself in the backyard here in Montauk, as I've been sitting since last summer, sitting as I've been listening as the crickets have died down, sitting as it's been silent. Tonight I can hear frogs. There's a chorus of frogs, man. It's happening. It's coming. Spring. This jacket is open. If you enjoyed this show, then please consider donating. As I've already made clear, theater is what I do. Normally, I'm performing live, but that's all gone away. I'm super excited to have found this new avenue with which to perform and communicate and connect with all of you. If you aren't under the means to donate, then please just click like or send me a note. Tell me that you were here and that you felt something in this moment with me. Because, as I said, there's no applause that comes at the end of this. It's just the moment ends, and then I'm just sitting here. Also, if you'd like to know about future online shows, you can go to my website and then write in your name. There's a little mailing list there. And if you want to see any past shows, they're all up on YouTube. So I'm going to end this show now, and thank you so much. I'll be back in 5 weeks, right at the beginning of May. No idea what the show will be. These are all born out of the moment. I create them all just in the 2 to 3 weeks before I perform them, and then that's it. So thank you very much. We'll fade to black, and I'll still be sitting here though, drinking this drink with all of you who are sitting out there. And thank you so much, and I'll see you next time.